Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going nuclear, okay? So hold on, it's going to be a very thrilling day. I shouldn't say that because actually today is a schmooze day, and officially there's no agenda. I don't tell people what to talk about, and I just put people together and shake and pour over shaved ice and see what happens. And usually it works. Um, but sometimes I can pretty well predict what people are going to talk about because I know their interests. And sometimes I even combine people because of their interests. So we have four people here who are interested in nuclear issues. And so my guess is that we'll be talking about nuclear energy and nuclear risks. But I'm not prescribing that, guys. You can talk about whatever you want. Okay, the first person here is Gordon Edwards, who's standing in for MV Romana, who had something else he couldn't do today. So Gordon Edwards is in someplace outside of Ottawa, some little town. What town is it, Gordon?
Hampstead. It's really part of Montreal proper.
Oh, okay. Gordon is just about the wisest man I know about nuclear matters, and I refer to him every time I get puzzled. In I guess Sudbury, isn't it? Richard Denton is a retired physician. He is the co-president of the North American branch, half of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Are you still that, Richard?
Yes.
Good. Okay. It'll keep you out of mischief. And I think the other part of the way of keeping yourself occupied is through Rotary, right?
Correct.
You're also a big wheel in Rotary. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Doug Saunders is my favorite standby sort of co-host because he always thinks of the right questions to ask people. Doug is familiar to everybody. Doug is the international affairs correspondent. Are there others at the Globe and Mail, or are you it?
I'm the columnist. There's plenty of correspondence. And these titles don't really mean a lot either. I just write a lot about stuff outside of Canada.
Okay, because I thought there was some sort of hierarchy in which being the international affairs man made you the sole big cheese. Is that not quite the case, or?
It doesn't carry any fiduciary. I think they give you a nice title in lieu of that, and I think I chose the title.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I'm glad you are able to carry it with pride, and I always refer to it every time I talk about you. And Adam Wynn is my right-hand man. He is with me and helping me every day of the week and sometimes into the middle of the night when I have a problem. And he's so reliable and so helpful and so solicitous that I just want to give him every bit of praise and thanks that I can. Besides which, he actually is quite interested in nuclear matters and is a bit of an expert on these topics in various ways. What's going on? Here comes Richard. Yes, what do you have to say about your concerns?
Well, my concern is, of course, the existential threat of nuclear weapons. And I'll just start off with making a few controversial statements that Doug can then jump in on. First of all, I would say that we don't need to worry about national security. The Russians or the Chinese are not going to attack us because to do so would be suicide, mutually assured destruction. And what often happens is that the big powers then fight their little wars in tertiary countries, be it Afghanistan, the Middle East, Venezuela, etc. Nuclear weapons, I think, are not useful. They're useful in terms of a threat. And I think that is what North Korea is using its nuclear weapons so that it won't be attacked like Gaddafi in Libya or Saddam Hussein in Iraq. but otherwise, they're really not useful. So what is happening now with nuclear weapons is that they're now making them smaller into what, quote, is tactical nuclear weapons instead of the large strategic nuclear weapons. And they're now threatening to use these on the battlefield. And of course, if they did, then what would happen would be the domino effect. They would quickly start using larger ones and then going back to the strategic, and we have an all-out nuclear war. So that's my big threat.
Now, just
or
check.
worry.
I don't want to challenge you, but when you say they're now doing it as if this is something new.
It is. Before it was, let's build a bigger, better bomb. And you had things like Bravo.
Yeah. Well, how new is it? Because I mean, there have been for the last 10 years or so, I've been a little bit every now and then worried about the fact that there are tactical weapons in Europe that have not been covered by any of the other previous arms reduction agreements between the US and the others. I mean, Russia and NATO and so on. So the question was to get them out of there, but I assume the tactical weapons have been there 20, 30 years. How long have they been there? They're just now making them, are you saying?
No,
They're making them now, but
there's a modernization going on. They're spending $1 trillion in the United States, and the other big powers are following suit pretty well. The so-called modernization, which really means making them more precise, smaller, and more usable from their point of view, as a way of getting away with certain strikes that will not cause the catastrophic repercussions to large populations, perhaps. But the difficulty is that once you start fighting a nuclear war, once the first nuclear explosion occurs, then how do you contain it? And how do you prevent it from growing at that point? Are people just going to sit back and say, oh, well, let's just think this over? It's a very dangerous situation. And we're really playing with fire on a very large scale. Don't forget that we do have strategic nuclear weapons, and many of them are on very short hair trigger alert, in the sense that they can be fired within 2 minutes. And once they're fired, they cannot be recalled. So there are real dangers here. Also, the proliferation of nuclear weapons to more and more states. You're talking, as Richard points out, in the case of North Korea, they're certainly trying to use it as a way of sending a warning signal to the big powers. Don't try and mess with us, because we've got something that'll really bite hard. But once you get a widespread proliferation, and the fact that North Korea has managed to do it, the fact that India and Pakistan have managed to do it, and once India and Pakistan, for example, have got their nuclear weapons, they're no longer treated as pariahs. They're treated as allies. They're treated as normalization of relationships. Canada is even selling uranium to India without any signing of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, without any requirement for them to stop building their nuclear weapons, without any requirement to disarm. So we, Canada, are playing a very dangerous game as well, because we ourselves are undermining not only the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but right now we're talking about building new reactors in Canada, which would involve the extraction of plutonium from a radiated fuel that we already have in Canada. And extracting plutonium is the first step toward building nuclear weapons. So by Canada doing this here in Canada, we're sending a signal to the world that this is okay. If we can do it, surely you can do it too. You can't run a world on a double standard forever. Sooner or later, the hypocrisy is going to catch up with us. And so every country in the world is going to want to aspire to do the same things. And we have lost track. Maybe Canada never had it in focus, really. But we have lost track as a citizenry, perhaps, that the goal has to be not to manage nuclear weapons, but to really eliminate them. And this prohibition, this UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which just came into force this year, is the first real international instrument that actually envisages a genuine elimination of nuclear weapons. None of our other international instruments envisage this. So I think that if the people listening to this program, I think the most important thing is to realize not only that we have to get rid of nuclear weapons, but really ultimately we have to get rid of war. Because if we don't focus on the fact that we are our own worst enemies, we are the instruments of our own destruction. We are the ones who are going to destroy civilization and perhaps destroy the entire planet. So we are the greatest threat, and we have to confront ourselves. We have to confront ourselves and say, what the hell are we doing about this? And we have, for example, the Canadian government, which is saying in an absurd fashion, they're saying that no, we won't sign on to the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons because we have other fish to fry. For example, we want to sell uranium to even countries that have nuclear weapons, but also we want to expand and make the game even more dangerous by accessing plutonium. And they claim, that is the Trudeau government right now, they claim that they are more invested in producing something or creating something which they've been working on since the 70s and which seems dead in the water, which is a fissile materials cutoff treaty, which means we're going to have a treaty whereby people will promise not to produce the materials that you need for nuclear weapons. Well, you know what? One of those materials is plutonium, and here we are trying to extract plutonium in Canada. So we're shooting. We don't even know that our left hand doesn't even know what the right hand is doing. Because why? Because these are really just words, and they do not envisage a world without nuclear weapons. Stopping the production of fissile materials does nothing to eliminate the arsenals that already exist. So what we have is all the fingers, for example, and I'm not saying that one shouldn't be worried about what might be happening in Iran. I'm not saying that that's nothing to worry about, but I am saying that all the fingers that are pointing to Iran and saying, no, naughty, naughty, they all have their own stash of nuclear weapons. So what kind of a world is that? In which the whole process...
I said there was no agenda, and you have just produced a list of topics that each one would be a complete agenda for at least one show, and I think the list must at least have 10 different topics on it.
Meta, could I try to bring this around to? I'd be interested in hearing what you all think of how this year has progressed in terms of helping assuage some of those worries. And particularly, I point to three developments in 2021. One is the dialogues between Russia and the United States, including the recent Putin-Biden summit, which point to a renewal of the New START treaty. The second being what appears to be a commitment from at least the European side of NATO to back away from battlefield or tactical nuclear weapons in Central and Eastern Europe. And the third,
I hadn't heard that.
The third, well,
because that's news to me.
And of course, it's designed to head off Russia being a little more forward with its use of tactical nuclear weapons. But the third thing being the renewal by the United States, or the rejoining by the United States of the JCPOA, the so-called Iran nuclear deal, which seems to be a nice model for how to enforce compliance with the non-proliferation treaty, because it allows a removal of sanctions as a reward for daily monitored compliance with the NPT, and it also allows countries to pursue nuclear energy while complying with the NPT, so therefore saving the planet while denuclearizing. I don't know to what extent it can be expanded to other countries. We've had those 2.5 developments.
There's a third, which I don't know whether it's happened or not, and that is the pressure on Biden to bring up no first use with Putin. Now, I don't I know there was pressure on him. I don't know whether he did it or not. Would that have been announced if he brought up the topic, because he's been on record as favoring no first use policies, and therefore there was good reason to urge him to bring it up when he did meet with Putin, but I didn't see any reference to it. Would we necessarily know if he had done so?
Any inside line on that? No.
Okay, good.
Just it was Peter Buses, our IPPNW head of the Netherlands chapter, that produced an open letter that was co-authored also with him and Pugwash, and got a lot of organizations and world leaders to sign, urging Putin and Biden to come to negotiations in terms of the nuclear weapons. And so they did agree that nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought, which is the Gorbachev-Reagan line. But it remains to be seen now whether these words will actually be put into action. I think that Biden, unfortunately, has a number of hawks around him, and they've made some certainly inflammatory comments about various people in the past, which certainly has not been helpful. But I mean, it's just sort of half a year now into Biden's presidency, so it is early, and fingers are crossed that that we will make progress in getting rid of nuclear weapons, and certainly the no first use / sole purpose is the new topic that people are certainly pushing. And I think that that is certainly a worthwhile process. But I think, in the past, we've looked at these, quote, small steps to get to abolition. And like the fissile material cutoff treaty that Gordon talked about, it has gone nowhere. And unfortunately, these small steps haven't really happened either. So that's why the TPNW has come out and said, let's just get rid of them, period. So I'll just leave it at that, and then let everybody else chip in.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Meta, what I was referring to about the commitment from NATO was the communique that the NATO leaders put out in advance of the Biden-Putin talks, declaring we have no intention to deploy land-based nuclear missiles in Europe. And to my understanding, there aren't any deployed on the NATO side anymore, although there were secretly.
Oh, they're tactical weapons.
Well, they were
I hear. I mean, aren't there?
I think they use the phrase.
They don't talk about them because they're not covered in any of the treaties. They're
well,
not.
They were covered in INF, but that's.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I could be wrong. Of course, I could.
It's possible that they're using the phrase land-based decisively, although I don't believe there are land-based tactical nuclear weapons deployed by NATO in Europe at the moment, are there?
I thought they were withdrawn.
Yeah.
All of the tactical nuclear weapons have been withdrawn from Europe.
Land-based.
No. Yeah, there's still the nuclear weapons in Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Turkey.
Okay.
And Turkey is, maybe not the most stable country. So again, there's always that risk of accident and miscalculation there.
Well, those have to be tactical weapons, don't they? And they are land-based. And Turkey's not in Europe, so maybe that's how they're.
No, I mean, they're.
Turkey's in Europe and it's in NATO.
Exactly. And they're on the land, but I would say, yeah, they're not land-based. They would probably be launched by aircraft.
Okay, yes, that just shows how little I know.
That's correct. I think the last I understood, NATO does have nuclear weapons in Turkey, but they're all air-based. And I believe they're bombs, technically, rather than missiles. So, Matt, you're right, they're tactical, but the NATO chiefs we're technically right in that they're not land-based. So I don't know how much that counts for. I don't know how important I mean, as Richard points out, that there have been some nuclear hawkish people in the higher ranks of the Biden and previously Obama administrations. You can bet there were in the Trump administration too, and there's not a consensus, as far as I understand, in U.S. leadership around tactical nuclear weapons. I don't think the INF treaty is going to come back anytime soon.
I don't even think it covered him. Adam, you are really fast on the while we're talking. Look it up and find out how many tactical nuclear weapons there are in Europe and where they are, and whether they're land-based or. I know we've got the Brits have their tridents, but okay. Those aren't tactical, are they?
No, that counts as strategic.
Yeah.
The French deterrent counts as strategic as well. And those things aren't moving. It's political suicide in both countries to even discuss doing anything about them, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, well, there you've raised a whole bunch of questions that I don't know what to make of, but also there, I've received, and maybe all of us have been getting stuff in our inbox about different people's impression of what went on between Putin and Biden, and Tariq Ralph is the most cynical sounding, I mean, most jaded and pessimistic, and he basically was referring to some language in the communique they issued jointly about they're going to pursue strategic stability talks. And I took that as a very good sign. It sounds good to me. But Tariq talked about it as the kind of language that the hawks use for basically looking for ways of keeping everything that everybody already has without making many. I don't know, I may be misrepresenting Tariq's point of view. I guess the question is how much we should take heart from the statement they made at the end of their brief conversation. Is this strategic stability talks anything to write home about, or is it just word magic?
As I said, it sounds good on paper. But the proof is in the pudding and in the eating, and we've yet to see that. I think there is some optimism to counter Tarek's opinions. We do have the meeting of the first meeting of the state parties on the TPNW in January, and a number of countries are going to attend now as observers. So we have some NATO countries, Norway, also Sweden, possibly the Netherlands, possibly Germany, and certainly we are trying to urge Canada to do that. We also have the 17 Swedish initiative countries that have come up with, I think it's 22 recommendations. And Canada is part of that, although Canada has not sent Marc Garneau to those meetings. They've had 4 meetings, and Canada has been represented by lesser stature people at those meetings. And so, again, one wonders about Canada's sincerity in attending them. Certainly, Canada is not showing any leadership like it has in the past.
What have they described those talks as being about? I don't know much about them. Those Swedish talks.
Well, the Swedish, it's sort of I would say a reinvention of Doug Roach's Middle Power Initiative, and back in Pierre Trudeau's days. So you have 17 countries that are coming together to form a group to push for nuclear abolition, but doing it in very much a stepwise approach with 22 recommendations. And so that is sort of opening the door, but again, it remains to be seen where that will go.
All right. Have we disposed of nuclear weapons issues, or are there other things to be handled on this little topic?
Well, from the point of view of the governments, of course, it's a question of managing a very difficult and thorny situation involving multiple players with multiple motives, and how to address this. And we're talking about some promising developments. There's no doubt that that the things that Doug mentioned are definitely alleviations of concern, at least temporary. But the difficulty is that comes a new president, and things could change dramatically, take a nosedive. The difficulty here is that as long as you have the nuclear arsenals in place, you're really dependent upon the rolling the dice and seeing who gets to have control over those nuclear arsenals. Before Hitler was the Weimar Republic, and maybe the Weimar Republic could be trusted. But once you have somebody in power who doesn't have any restraints on what they plan to do, one of the good things about Trump was that at least he wasn't interested in starting wars. You could have somebody like that who is interested in starting wars. That would be a more difficult situation. So I think that as citizens, as people who are outside the establishment and who think globally, because let's face it, leaders of governments can't afford to think globally. They have to adopt a kind of a flat Earth society point of view, because their country or their jurisdiction has borders, and those borders make once you have a globe and you cut out a country, it looks flat because it has edges, and you're not concerned with the whole globe. We as citizens have the luxury of thinking about the planet as a whole, and I think that we have to provide the leadership. Let's not forget that all of the, in my view anyway, all of the major advances that have taken place in arms control or disarmament have come about as a result of massive human demonstration of concern. The Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty was brought about because of millions of people who were concerned about the radioactive fallout on their children, the effect on their children. Remember the millions of people who marched during the Reagan administration in New York City. Tremendous demonstration, which brought about almost an agreement between Gorbachev and Reagan to eliminate nuclear weapons altogether. So I think that people en masse can perform.
They weren't doing. I can't get them to go out. We've been doing our best. You have too, Gordon.
I'm not saying that.
I'll be a leader. You'll be a leader.
I'm not saying
Richard will be a leader, but we can't get people to follow.
I'm not saying that it's our responsibility to do this. I'm just saying that this is what's probably going to have to, if we're going to.
But it's magic.
Progress,
It really worries me. What is this Nanos poll that came out? What was it? 70 what percent? It was nearly 80%, I think, of the Canadian population wants to get rid of nuclear weapons. What was the percentage?
70 and 80%.
Huh? How much?
70 and 80, 74% and 80%.
Yeah.
And to get rid of nuclear weapons was 80%, and for Canada to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was 74%.
And the Canadian government doesn't do a damn thing and doesn't even bat an eye. They don't care about that. Those figures don't mean anything because people are not out in the streets and won't go out in the street. And I don't know what to do about it.
Well, Meta, I think there's two pieces to that equation. That Gordon raised one of them, which is there needs to be a public desire for disarmament, and I think the polls in most of the democracies indicate that there is an overwhelming public desire. But I think the other side of the coin is there, from the perspective of the political leaders, there has to be something that they can accomplish within their term of office and be able to say that's done. They're not going to waste time or political capital on something that pushes the can down the road a few inches and so on. I mean, the reason why the Reagan-Gorbachev stuff worked, it was partly because of internal stuff within the Reagan administration and the Schultz-Weinberger feud working out one way rather than the other. But that was mainly because of a political calculation, a realization there was something that could be done within 4 years that you could point to the public and say, we got rid of this, we did this. And I think there's a limited range of, and I think this is true in some authoritarian states as well. I think there are authoritarian leaders who would like to be able to tell their publics, we made you safer.
Right.
And which is why these talks can work.
Well, look at how
but
quickly
there's a limited range of instruments right at the moment that could lead to something quick and decisive. The chemistry could come together. You could imagine how it might, but making imperceptible moves toward a New START treaty is not going to be that political win that leaders are going to say this is worth wasting half of our bureaucracy and much of our political capital on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are making some progress, Meta. The International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, has the cities appeal, and we're now up to 14 cities in Canada, with the major ones, Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, signing on to that, and that is in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So I think as we get more cities to sign on, that will again convince the feds that this is something worth dealing with.
Yeah.
Gordon, do you agree?
Well, I agree. But the point is, I think the desire is there. I think the consciousness is there. I think what's lacking is the will expressed in action. And I'm not saying that it's up to us to, I'm not castigating anybody for not doing this. I'm just expressing a kind of an observation that when people feel strongly about something and they feel that it is accomplishable, sometimes they can mobilize. And it's not up to us to mobilize them. It's up to them to mobilize themselves. But I think that as a save the world kind of a process, we have to realize that the people who are going to save this planet are the people who are not necessarily the people in power. They, in a sense, are more limited in their scope than we are, because we can think globally and they can't. They have to think in terms of their own political limitations. So I think the leadership can come from the grassroots. And I think that the thing that prevents a lot of people, like what about this large majority of people that want Canada to sign the abolition? They are not convinced that they have any power. And if people could sort of realize that, yeah, they do have power, they don't realize what a power they do have. If this, for example, could be manifested during an election campaign in a dramatic way, it could influence the subsequent sequelae of the election. Whereas generally speaking, people say, oh, well, that's not accomplishable, even though I really want it. So therefore, let's just concentrate on bread and butter issues.
What about scaling back the number of countries that possess nuclear weapons? I've spent a bunch of time talking to South Korean leaders who deal with North Korea. And I mean, their belief is that having nukes actually puts North Korea at much greater danger of being invaded. The notion that, and I think it's in our interest to make sure this notion gets widely understood, the notion that possessing nuclear weapons makes a small country safer from attack by the United States and its allies isn't true. And it may lengthen the timescale of an attack, but certainly North Korea's, I mean, Gaddafi learned that. He dumped his nuclear weapons program in order to save his life for an additional 20 years. But
that's the point. But look what happened to him. And can you imagine why?
It would have happened sooner if he'd been going for a nuclear program. Certainly, the United States would have gone in like gangbusters in the 80s. Okay,
but what kind of message is North Korea taking from the example of, he winds up in a ditch someplace?
Actually, it's very, very interesting that you mentioned the Libya situation, because Kim Jong-un has specifically referenced the United States media as well as politicians in the United States. It may have been Donald Trump, it may have been other politicians using that comparison. And it immediately solicits a very, very strong response from the North Koreans if you make any sort of comparison to what happened to Gaddafi.
Well, they got their
And-
nuclear program from the
Future
same Pakistani
administration.
guy that the Libyans did. So there's there's a tie between it, but certainly the survivability of the North Korean regime has not been enhanced. The survivability of an individual member of the Kim family might be in the short term, but it certainly raises the greater possibility that the powers of the world would not have had any interest in intervening in North Korea if it had remained non-nuclear. It would have been a regional problem. But the possibility that there will be some very risky action against North Korea in the foreseeable future is certainly raised by that fact. Although I think our greatest hope remains the regime ending and the nuclear program ending as a result of the regime ending. That's what ultimately caused South Africa to drop its nuclear ambitions. It's what has kept a lot of other regimes from pursuing long shot goals of nuclear ambitions.
Wait a minute, you're looking for the end of North Korea's regime. Is that
It's going to happen at some point, yes.
Hmm.
I had a funny sit down with the South Korean Minister of Reunification. He was in Germany with me, and he was studying the German reunification process, so he could draw up plans for South Korea's for the reunification of the Koreas. Mostly negative lessons, I should add. He didn't see the Germans as having done it very well, but he was drawing up plans for the current Minister of Reconciliation to plan for reunification of the Koreas, which he fully expected to happen within his lifetime, and he was in his late 60s. So it's fragile. Fragile places with a poor economic basis have a tendency not to last, and nuclear weapons don't help them a lot. The things that the financial bankruptcies that ended the Warsaw Pact were not helped by the possession of nuclear weapons in Warsaw Pact countries.
Mm-hmm. If I might say, one of the things that has occurred to me is that global warming has really become through citizen action, has become more and more accepted by the political leaders. Again, the leadership has come mainly from the independent scientists feeding information to the public, and the public really expressing themselves. People like Greta Thunberg has made such a terrific impression. Now, I believe, on this panel, would see nuclear weapons as being a similar existential threat as global warming. But unlike global warming, it isn't manifested in the public domain in the same way. And part of the reason for that is because the negative consequences of nuclear weapons are not experienced. With global warming, we can see the floods, the tornadoes, the wildfires, and so on. But I think that one of the job of intellectuals of all kinds, or people who are well educated, well aware of the risk, is to try and make that real to the imagination, because we don't want to witness nuclear annihilation in order to avoid it. And this is where IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, did a really good job of this in the early days, before they won their first Nobel Prize in 1985. They had full-page ads showing what would happen with New York City in the case of a nuclear explosion. They also drew wonderful analogies saying how eliminating smallpox from the world cost the same as about 2 weeks of the arms race, and that providing clean water around the world would be the equivalent of about a month or so of the arms race. And that what could be done with this money, what could be done with these resources. Also, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War made a wonderful analogy, which has always stayed in my mind, is that the possession of nuclear weapons is like an addiction. And like an addiction, it doesn't follow logical patterns. An addict doesn't reason necessarily himself out of an addiction. He has to feel the need to save his life. by getting rid of these nuclear weapons. And generally, they need a support group. They need people around them to support them and to urge them in the right direction if they're going to have any hope of kicking the habit. And I think that we have to view nuclear weapons as an addiction. It's not something that's going to be relinquished as a result of any kind of logical thinking. It's going to be as a result of combined, an orchestra of voices that will, and I think that if we can simply use every effort we can to spread that message to people, that what we need is people. We need people to provide the leadership. We need to be friends of the people with nuclear weapons to help them to get rid of them and to urge them to sign things like this one document, which isn't by itself going to do much, but it's an expression of will. And if that expression of will is on paper and signed, then it gives us at least a direction to move in.
I fully agree with you, Gordon. I think what I started off saying was that we need to move from national security to personal security, that we're not being threatened as a nation, but certainly the pandemic has showed as a global problem. The climate change is a global problem, and all of these global problems like radiation and nuclear weapons all cross borders. And people are now realizing that this is what is needed. Now, I think in terms of getting the mass appeal on the nuclear weapons is to attach that to the environment. And so we know, but the public isn't aware, that the contribution of the military to greenhouse gases, the Pentagon contributes more to greenhouse gases than the whole country of Sweden or Morocco. The amount of fuel that a jet or any of the military operations contributes is huge. And they were excluded from the Kyoto and from the Paris. And now World Beyond War is going to try to bring this up at the COP, was it 26 there in Glasgow, Scotland in the fall, to make that point. I think also the amount of money that is spent on the military that could be spent on all these other global problems is correct, Gordon. So I certainly see that as a way, and certainly what we're trying to do is do the divestment. ICANN and PAX have Don't Bank on the Bomb. Alan Ware has moved the money. Code Pink, World Beyond War also have divestment programs as well. So I think getting the money out of the military, various politicians to the south have suggested a 10% decrease in the military, which again would free up tremendous amounts of money for handling these other global problems. And I think the other thing is that it's the intellectual knowledge that is being wasted on modernizing nuclear weapons that could be diverted to addressing these other global problems. So I think that's another thing that needs to be considered too.
True. If I might just throw in there, also, I was very, very struck by the dramatic animated graphics that was used by Stephen Starr, illustrating how even a limited nuclear war, say between India and Pakistan, would affect the entire Northern Hemisphere and cause food shortages for years afterwards. And of course, a less limited nuclear war. And by a limited nuclear war, we're talking about a small number of nuclear weapons exchanged on both sides. But because of the atmospheric consequences, this is something that people are generally unaware of too. They think, well, it's not going to happen here, and so therefore it's not going to affect me that much. But it does. It has those global consequences. In terms of climate, in terms of environment, if the war were to take place, even if it was far away from us and very limited in scope.
Yeah,
You know, I think everybody is talking rationally. I spend all my time every day of the week talking rationally with people, and I post these things out there, and I don't think it makes a difference. It doesn't, because we're not rational people are not rational. You know why they got upset and there was an end to the Cold War? Well, there was a moment when people were scared out of their minds. When you have emotion involved, where people actually think, no, any minute now, is that a nuclear weapon I see coming at me? You know, that level of anxiety, then people start maybe getting action. But the reason people won't go out in the streets is they're not emotional about it. They think, well, it's nothing special is going on. They are a little bit worried, a little bit emotional about global warming. They can see, you know, the wildfires, and there are a few things that make them think that this is kind of real. But I think what we have to do is, you know, all of the rational arguments we can put out there, and you've just put out a few dozen of them in the last 20 or 30 minutes, doesn't make any difference. We have to do something that makes people emotionally engaged with the issue. And I think we have to change people's heads now. I've got to the point of thinking, I believe that it was, you know, we can't change people, so let's change our laws and our institutions and our treaties and that sort of thing. But you can't get people to change their treaties because they don't care enough, because they're not emotional. So we have to actually,
I think Gordon touched at the core to that problem, is that we got good at emotional communication in the 80s, when there was a lot of creative work done to persuade the public that the possibility of an ICBM war, what it would feel like, what it would look like, you know.
But it was more than that. We really realistically had to worry about the fact that these bombs might be coming any minute now.
Exactly. That was successfully done. Now, as Gordon points out, we need a different sort of communication to persuade people that the more plausible current risks of nuclear conflict, which I would say number one would be a Kashmir conflict causing Lahore or New Delhi to get hit, possibly number two, slightly more distant, something causing Taipei to get hit. That even a minor thing like that, any one of those, a single weapon going off in any one of those three cities would be the greatest humanitarian catastrophe of history. Exceeding anything that's ever happened before. Never mind the possibility that somebody would fire back and hit another city, or it escalating into something else. And as Gordon points out, that there would be huge atmospheric consequences that we've all forgotten. I mean, I think some of you were alive during the pre-test ban era, and anyone who lived through those years has been exposed to life-threatening atmospheric risks at a level that people born afterwards were not. So how do we communicate that risk? I think there's in the public imagination, there's a sense that these are regional problems on the other side of the world that don't affect us. And there's a lack of recognition that even a limited battlefield nuclear exchange in one of the countries that now has the possibility to use it would be very dangerous for us.
Yeah.
Well, how about? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, no, it's okay. I've already spoken too much, perhaps, but I just wanted to mention that René Dubos. I heard René Dubos at the University of British Columbia. He gave many years ago. And he said, you know, we talk about an energy crisis, but there's no energy crisis. You look around you and there's all the cities are lit up like Christmas trees. You talk about pollution, but people look around, they say, well, you know, it's not that bad. It's, the streets are reasonably clean, et cetera, et cetera. He said that in order to really realize the scope of the environmental crisis as an existential threat, we would have to imagine, we have to cultivate our imagination, which triggers emotion, to anticipate something that we haven't experienced. And he said, if we do this, we will be the first civilization in human history to have done it. Nevertheless, that's the challenge. That's what we have to do, because we have no alternative. It's either that or it's a grim scenario. It's a very grim scenario, because no matter how good it looks right now, that whole thing could just go to hell in a handcart anytime, as long as we are loading the dice against ourselves constantly. And the thing that's happening now with the nuclear weapons that is particularly alarming is that for several years, since even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, there has been a diminution, a dismantling of nuclear warheads and so on. Now this has stopped, and now we're talking about revitalizing the nuclear arsenals of the world. And it's basically throwing the whole idea of disarmament out the window. If the superpowers are not going to live up to even the shadow of Article 6, which is the agreement to get rid of their own nuclear weapons, then they're just saying, hey, it's every man for himself. Just do what you like. And so I believe that that this is a crisis moment, although it's not perceived as such.
I fully agree with you, Gordon. But getting back to meta, I think when there was the Korean missile aimed at Hawaii,
Right.
that did get some people worried, for sure. And I think, as Adam has just pointed out in the chat box, the importance of films and video games. And I think that is the quote, social media that will reach the vast majority. And unfortunately, Gordon and I are not social media wizards. It will remain to be the young people to do that mobilization. But I think there are young people that are making movies, that are making videos, and are coming up with games that are pointing out the dangers of nuclear weapons. And so hopefully that will mobilize the masses.
Thanks for pointing out the chat thing. Adam, it's useless to put stuff in the chat because I don't read them. And we should be reading them anyway.
I did not want to interrupt such a good conversation.
Adam, if you have something to say, you say it. You're on the show. But I will read this thing that you said. Alongside France and the UK, NATO has nukes in Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Turkey. Okay, that's the information I wanted you to get. Now,
yes, I was going to add it, but the conversation has shifted by the time I came across that, and I didn't want to just interject when others are making very, very good and very interesting points.
Well, remember the film called The Day After? And Reagan said that's what he watched, and that's what it mobilized him while he was in the White House. So indeed, movies actually can touch your emotion and get people engaged. And what is much better than movies, which are, a movie only has your attention and your engagement with a lead character for an hour and a half. But a TV series can go on 10 years. And every week for many months, every year for 10 years. And people then develop strong attachments to the characters. Either that or the show goes under. They collapse if they don't identify. So my next goal in life is, and I'm adding it to my bucket list. My bucket list is growing instead of shrinking. Even though I'm going to be 90 pretty soon. But my new addition to my bucket list is to start making soap operas that have to do with nuclear weapons and other serious such matters. And I, for many years, have had the plot. One of them is going to be, there are three friends. One is a guy who is a missileer working down in a silo in Nebraska or someplace, and with his finger on the key. And his best friend is a Greenpeace staff member, and they get together every weekend to go fishing. And they discuss these matters, among other things. But they have a third friend who is sort of in between. And the point is, you have to see which way this third guy is going, or maybe it could be a woman, is going to jump, either in favor of the Greenpeace activist or the missile silo guy. and the drama will play out over a period of at least a year as people watch every week as they debate these issues. And they should get pretty emotional, as well as having other things that are dramas in their lives. They could have comedy, they could have their love life, they could have all kinds of other things. But this would be one of the three topics. And I've been figuring out how to really shoot this locally. Maybe we could go out in the backyard and pretend that, well, I get my friends to do it, and any of you can be part of the characters if you would like to have a role in this ongoing drama. This is my goal in life. It's now officially on my bucket list. Anybody else?
I had a nice opportunity at the Vanier College. They had an opportunity. You could write your own curriculum and teach a course called College Complementary Course. It was not in any particular program. They've got the science program, the social science program, and so on, business program. So this could be a complementary course, a college-wide complementary. And I had two of them. One of them was on science, technology, and the nuclear arms race. And the other one was on energy and society. And many of the people who attended the science and the nuclear arms race course were very apprehensive, especially some of the young female students. They thought, what am I doing this? Am I really, I don't want to think about this. The point is, as humans, we want to avoid thinking about unpleasant things. And so I made a great effort to make it very interactive, the course, and also to make it as positive, to talk about as many positive things as negative things. And I showed films like, for example, Gandhi, talking about nonviolence and talking about conflict resolution in general, talking about Russian music and Russian society, Russian history, to sort of get them to think in terms of humans, not just the leaders, but the humans, and present it as a human problem. And it turned out to be, I had many students come to me afterwards and thank me for making the course not only interesting and informative, but also somewhat uplifting, in the sense that they felt a little more empowered to think that we're not really hopeless victims. I think this is the most important thing here, is this sense of hopelessness, the sense of helplessness and hopelessness. I think that that's what we have to really try and encourage people to see beyond that. There's many wonderful success stories. Like, I don't know if you've really paid close attention to the sequence of events leading up to the Atmospheric Test Ban Treaty. But the fact is that America, due to public pressure, unilaterally stopped atmospheric testing without any treaty. And shortly afterwards, USSR unilaterally stopped atmospheric testing. And it was only 2 years later that they signed a treaty. I mean, this idea that people are powerless, and we've got to counteract that.
Good. Okay. Adam, if you want the last word, you can have it.
Oh, it's been a very, very fascinating discussion. Just bridging back to the notion of movies and television shows, I think they do have a very, very significant role in activism. But the other thing is they may serve to desensitize people, and that's something to always be cautious of. Is that when people see 24/7, whether it be in the news or fictional productions, violence and weapons, and whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear, they do become desensitized to it over time, or it becomes something of interest. So it could go either way.
Okay, so we're through. Is that right? Okay, this has been interesting and emotionally stimulating. That's really what I'm looking for, a little adrenaline. Bye.
Thank you very much, Meta, and good to meet you, Doug.
Bye.
As always, Gordon and Adam.